I was waiting in Bombay. My family was joining me. I had gone ahead 3 weeks earlier. My older daughter was 18, Brinda. She was just graduating from high school. Younger daughter was 15 and her name was Aarti. My husband, Vishnu. They were all coming on an Air India flight.
Good evening. It's one of the worst air disasters ever, and it's taken more Canadian lives than any other crash in history. Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747, left Toronto and Montreal last night, bound for London and India.
Unfortunately, there was a terrorist bomb placed on that flight, mid-Atlantic, just over the coast of Ireland on June 23rd, 1985.
Hi friends, welcome to the Aspire and Acquire podcast. I'm your host Sandeep Suri. Join me for listening to some incredible stories about some of the best professionals from very diverse fields like combat flying, robotic surgery, dancing, tea farming, journalism, deep sea diving, and so on. These accomplished professionals are not just outstanding in their jobs, but also have unique stories to share with us. We have tried to make the show truly global by having these guests from different parts of the world. So without further ado, let's dive into the session. India is one of the world's oldest civilizations and known for its rich cultural heritage. We are a confluence of religions, customs, and traditions. The principle of unity in diversity is the implicit law of nature in India. Known for its rich cultural heritage, India, for example, has 8 classical dance forms. Today, we would draw your attention to the Indian classical dance form called Bharatanatyam. I am delighted to introduce Ms. Lata Pada as our guest in today's episode of Aspire and Acquire. Lata is Canada's most celebrated Bharatanatyam dancer, choreographer, and founder of Sampradaya Dance Creations. Lata is internationally acclaimed for her excellence in Bharatanatyam. She is recognized as a leading dance artist whose lifelong involvement with Bharatanatyam is immensely recognized all over the world. Over her remarkable dance career, Lata has performed more than 600 concerts, including a performance for the President of India. She is arguably the biggest advocate of Bharatanatyam in North America. Lata has a fairly long list of awards, including the prestigious Pravasi Bharatiya Samman by the President of India, Order of Canada, and the Diamond Jubilee Medal from Queen Elizabeth II. Welcome to Aspire and Acquire, Lata. Happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandeep.
Let me begin by asking, how did you start your journey with Bharatanatyam? Was it a well-thought-through career move, or you were influenced by someone to learn this piece of art?
As a young girl in Cochin, my father was posted as a naval officer in Cochin Naval Base, and there was this teacher who came to teach Bharatanatyam to all the interested young girls on the naval base. So my sister and I actually started. At that time, I was 8 and she was 7.
Wow.
I was more interested and carried on with my training right up till the time that I was about 18. And then when I moved to Bombay, I continued my training with my current and only Guru Kalyanasundram, who's from Bombay, the Sri Rajarajeshwari Bharatanatyam Kala Mandir. But then I got married and moved to Canada, to a very remote northern mining town. My husband was a geologist. But then I sort of became an ambassador for Indian dance, and so I continued performing in Thompson, Manitoba, which is just near Churchill, Manitoba, where the polar bears are in Canada. I was asked to perform at various corporate events, the Rotary Club, for instance, and different women's sororities. Now, this was in 1964. So that's 58 years ago when I first moved to Canada.
So actually before I was born. Wow.
Well, I'm giving away my age now, but that's okay. It's
that's fine.
knowledge.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Indonesia with my husband to a remote mining town in Indonesia. When we were in Thompson, Manitoba, it was underground nickel mining. But when we went to Indonesia, it was surface mining for nickel.
Mhm.
And Inco, the company that my husband was working with, was a global nickel mining company. And they found a huge deposit on the island of what they used to call the Dutch Celebes. Because, as you know, the Dutch had occupied
That's right.
Indonesia, like the British had taken over India. But that island now is called Sulawesi. So we were in a remote mining town, and the only way we could get there was helicopter. But that started my fascination and my love for Indonesian dance, which included Balinese dance and Javanese dance. And those are, of course, just broad terms because there are very many variances in those dance forms. And we had many trained Balinese dancers and some Javanese dancers who were married to mining engineers or doctors on the site. So I learned from them. I think, a past life connection to Indonesia. I go to Bali very frequently, and I'll tell you about a collaboration that I did with Balinese dancers a little later. And then because we were closer to in Bombay, I kept returning to Bombay for a month's training with my guru in Bombay. And that was my lifelong training.
So tell us how Bharatanatyam has evolved in the last so many years.
It's actually centuries old. It's a very, very beautiful, very rich tradition of classical dance. It's one of the 8 classical dance forms. Bharatanatyam was a temple ritual form performed by solo hereditary dancers as a form of worship in the temples, mainly in South India, in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka. And then it was presented in the courts by the patrons being the Maharajas and wealthy landlords. And then it moved to the proscenium stages, but it had a very traumatic past because the support and the patronage for Bharatanatyam sort of went through some rough times from the time it was banned as temple worship because it was associated with not being a very savory dance form. So even some very important Indian nationalists of Indian origin supported the British with their very Victorian attitudes to ban temple dancing. So a whole community of musicians, composers, and dancers were marginalized from society, and the art form really suffered a setback. There was, unfortunately, some very Victorian attitudes towards many of the art forms in India. Even like, in the north, they call the Kathak dancers in the courts as the wives, and
Right.
and they were seen as not respectable and unsavory.
Right.
It's a beautiful, rich, sophisticated art form, and everybody is working with it to deepen it, to work with its movement vocabulary, to take it to new places, even in India and outside India. And since I've lived in the diaspora now for 58 years, I'm doing my best to demystify the notions that they have about Bharatanatyam, that it's a archaic museum artifact, because we talk about it, in terms of it's centuries old. But that is so wrong.
Yeah. Appreciate your efforts being put into this to ensure that, we, make it truly a global form of dance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you also talk to us about cross-culture choreography that you promote at your academy in Canada?
Well, Canada is a very unique country. It's multicultural, it's diverse, and it's truly an immigrant society, and it encourages it. And it has a very strong multicultural policy, and its immigrant population contributes so richly to its artistic and cultural traditions. And they bring all their performance traditions, their culinary traditions, and all kinds of artistic traditions to Canada. And we have a government that is very supportive of that. So, because of that, we have such a beautiful mix. And so, as an artist, and I love traveling also. So, I'm so curious about what goes on in terms of ideas that come from different traditions. And they encourage that in Canada. I did my master's at York University in dance, and it was at that time that my peers in the program were from all traditions, African traditions, Korean traditions, flamenco. You shared your ideas, you shared your projects with them, and then you went to their performances. So it was just a very beautiful experience. And so I think when you're an artist that's curious about life, that's open to ideas from different kinds of poetry, traveling, and most of all being aware of your work being relevant. So my collaborations have also been with, our company has done a collaboration with ballet. Now, here's the thing about ballet. I've been looking at ballet, and my ballet friends say they sat in and watched Bharatanatyam being taught or rehearsed in my company. And they say, oh my goodness, we thought the only thing common in Bharatanatyam and ballet was what we call a demi-plie position, where you sit and squat in a half-seated position. But we can't imagine that you train to do footwork in that position. We can't believe that you go into a deep bend. We can't believe that you do so much rigorous there's so much physicality in Bharatanatyam. Sure. And then to top it all, you also have to train in Abhinaya, which is not so much a part of training in ballet. In ballet, everybody has they have huge virtuosity in their dancing, the leaps and the jumps and the turns. But Abhinaya is such an important part of all the classical traditions in India. And that is something that those that haven't trained in it don't even realize how difficult it is. And I've told you about my intense love for Indonesia, and I still speak the language very fluently. I had gotten a fellowship to do research in Indonesia, Thailand, and Cambodia about the performance traditions of the Ramayana.
Oh, wow.
When I traveled, I went to Bali, and I had to meet this scholar whose books I had read. His name is Dr. Vayan Dibya. He lived just outside the tourist region of Ubud in Bali, in a village called Singapadu. He has written beautiful books, and he did his master's at UCLA in the United States. I just took a chance of finding out whether he was in that area. He's a very distinguished academic and a performer. I took a chance, and lo and behold, he was in Singapadu, which is 5 miles from Ubud, where all the tourists go to.
Correct.
But I was more interested in meeting him. And I did, and met him twice, and the collaboration was already seeded. We talked about doing an episode from the Mahabharata, the dice game, and the humiliation of Draupadi, and the war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas that resulted because of revenge, greed, and evil on the part of the Kauravas. And that turned out to be one of the most beautiful collaborations.
Where was that performed? Was it in Canada?
We toured it across Canada. We first went to Bali with my dancers, my music composer, who's from Bangalore, Praveen Rao, who has composed so many scores for all my productions. We all went to Bali for 3 weeks, and we first learned each other's forms, or at least learned the basics. Right. My Bharatanatyam dancers learned Balinese, the basics, and they learned the basics of Bharatanatyam even before we started collaborating. So that's what I mean when you ask me about fusion, because fusion is cut and paste or copy paste. Whereas when there's true integration, true respect for each other's tradition, true honor for each other's tradition, give and take, that is honest collaboration.
And that's a good form of blending the two forms, right?
That's right. That's right. And those that saw the production said, we couldn't tell where each form started and the other ended. And they're distinct movement vocabularies. You know, they're not, if you saw them each separately, it would astonish you as to how one would even begin to work together. Musically also, if the Balinese gamelan music is so different from Carnatic music that we use for Bharatanatyam. So we've done collaborations with, of course, with as I said, with ballet. We invited a very special choreographer from London called Mevin Koo, and he's trained in ballet, in Bharatanatyam. So I, as a producer and artistic director, I don't create things because I just like the thought of Bharatanatyam and ballet going together. I commission somebody who's trained in the form to come and create that on ballet dancers, well-trained ballet dancers and well-trained Bharatanatyam dancers. I've done a work on cricket.
Cricket, you said?
Yes. And we called it How's That?
Okay.
And I've worked with Korean dancers. I actually did a very important work called Sambad. And I did that with an indigenous Canadian choreographer.
Switching gears, just curious to learn, how do you stay physically and mentally prepared for performances and competitions of that scale that you've been doing?
I don't know. It's stressful for all of us. I don't think there's an easy way of staying prepared. I think just practice, and all good dancers. I don't claim to be one. I've not been in the best of shape, but all my dancer friends who are still performing at the age of 67, 68, it's pure dedication to the form and hours of practice every day. It's a complete immersion in the art form. I'm talking about the very, very successful soloists who are still performing today. Their introspection about the art, about their personal connection to the art form is very deep, very, very deep. And that's all they live for. Mm-hmm. I think they don't let the rest of society affect their life. Shall I put it that way?
There's a lot of sacrifice that goes in from the artist side.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they're not the ones who, care about Facebook or Instagram or things like that. Right. They just do their work.
Yeah.
So I think it's practice. That's what I tell my dancers and my students. Mm-hmm. There's no shortcut. So, you'd asked me about the unwritten rules of my dance academy. It really is about deciding for yourself that when you come in to train at Sampradaya Dance Academy, make up your mind whether you're going to be just a hobby dancer or whether you're going to be a serious dancer. Because we're at Sampradaya to provide that pathway to become a serious dancer and a professional dancer if you want to be. And I think we're one of the very few dance academies that give you those options. The time that you spend in the studio training, you got to give it your all and be serious about it and respect and honor the tradition that connects you to your cultural past. So to a large extent, when students and parents come into Sampradaya Dance Academy, our studios also reflect the cultural nuances of our traditions. The pictures of my gurus are up on the walls. The pictures of famous dancers are on the walls. It's not a sterile environment that they come into.
Good evening. It's one of the worst air disasters ever, and it's taken more Canadian lives than any other crash in history. Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747, left Toronto and Montreal last night, bound for London and India. It never made it. The plane simply disappeared from radar screens off the coast of Ireland. On board were 329 people. More than 280 of them were Canadians. At least 86 of the passengers were children. It is almost certain that no one survived.
Lata, it's very unfortunate that you lost both your daughters and your husband in the horrific Air India Kanishka bombing incident. I know it's tough, but how did you manage to convert your personal loss into a piece of art?
Well, I mean, I was waiting. It was dance. Dance was what was the catalyst for my healing. I was waiting in Bombay, training with my Guru Kalyana Sundaram. My family, I had gone ahead for three weeks earlier. My older daughter was 18 and she was just graduating from high school. And my older daughter was Brinda. Younger daughter was 15 and her name was Aarti. My husband Vishnu. They were all coming 3 weeks later on an Air India flight. Air India had just started its services from Toronto to Delhi and then to Bombay via London. And so we're all excited that we're going to fly Air India because all that, otherwise it was just either Air Canada or British Airways. And unfortunately, there was a terrorist bomb placed on that flight. And the plane, it was the Kanishka, Air India Kanishka, that exploded mid-Atlantic, just over the coast of Ireland on June 23rd, 1985. No survivors. And there were 329 people killed on the flight. 289 of them were of Indian origin, but they were Canadian citizens. Right. And the greatest tragedy beyond the loss of human lives was the second tragedy was Canada did not recognize it as a Canadian tragedy.
Yeah.
And I had a very strong role to play in demanding that they finally found out after the lengthy investigation who the perpetrators were. Right. And there was a very expensive trial. They found the bomb maker and he was arrested and spent time in jail. But the two main perpetrators who financed it, who were tried in court and through a very unreasonable and unforgivable legal technicality, they were acquitted. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. So we also pushed for an inquiry, a public inquiry, which was finally held. They found some very, very serious flaws with the Canadian legal system, the aviation security system, terrorism financing. So I've had a parallel life, Sandeep, as a dance artist and also as a very strong advocate for the Air India bombing to have justice.
I really admire you for all that you have done for the country and for the people there. It's not easy.
Dance was catharsis for me. If I didn't have dance to go back to, I don't know what I would have done. So when I heard the news of the Air India crash, of course, we all had to deal with going to Ireland and dealing with the identification. And, there's so many formalities. I moved to Toronto. I was living outside Toronto. I moved to Toronto. I just gave away my possessions. I just bought a small house, moved whatever I valued, and went right back to India and went back into my dance training. And that's what I did. Yeah. Almost like a woman possessed for 5 years, nonstop, morning to evening. I didn't know that was my intuitive way of just dealing with my grief, with my loss. Yeah. But dance pulled me out of it. And 5 years later, I won't say I had healed, but at least I had a sense of purpose. And so I came back to Canada and started my academy in 1990. It was not easy because in the diaspora, you're teaching students who have no connection to the root culture of a dance form. But Canada was very generous in its funding agencies, providing grants for deserving artists. So that's how I built my company and my academy. I'm very happy that we are now one of the foremost Indo-Canadian dance companies and academies in Canada.
Yeah, I must congratulate you for your contributions, across the globe. Yeah, this is not easy, especially under the circumstances you started. But yeah, you've come a long way. Last but not the least, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in Bharatanatyam dance form?
It's not an easy journey, let me put it that way. It's a difficult art form. It's certainly not Bollywood dance. I think it's more about the parents that you have to deal with and not the youngsters who want to come and learn it. Older students are already aware of how tough it is, but it's the parents that when they come, it's not, other dance academies, I don't know what they do to when they welcome new students, but in our case, we ask them to watch the classes before they enroll because we want them to see how structured our classes is. Because we teach theory, we teach rhythm calculation, and the technical aspect of the art form is also difficult. So it's more a question of the parents being oriented towards what a difficult art form it is. And many of them have expectations that their students will get to perform in a couple of years. Well, that's not the case in our academy. They've got to do exams. They've got to hang around for at least 12 years of training. Mm-hmm. And so that is the advice I would say, that you're in it for the long haul. And you've got to be dedicated. You've got to understand that it's a devotional art form. So you can leave your ego at the door and come in understanding that your teachers are somebody you treat with respect. Because you've got to understand, in the diaspora, you call your teachers by their first name. You dress any way you want in school. There's no uniforms in Canada unless you go to private school. Well, there's a decorum that we've got to maintain. And so I'm just talking about our academy. So it's a sophisticated dance form. It's a global dance form, but it has certain aesthetics and it has certain value systems that respect the tradition and the gurus who teach it. That's what I would say about what you would tell somebody who's just starting out. And older students, we audition them so that they understand. We have them show us what they've learned and then assess their abilities so that they know how we can help them go further.
If I could take the liberty of adding what you said earlier, practice, practice, practice. Right? That's very critical.
Yes, absolutely.
It is indeed a very interesting conversation, Lata. I'm sure there are a lot of young listeners who would have been intrigued by a wonderful success story today. I would like to thank you for joining us at the Aspire and Acquire podcast and for spreading the fragrance of this beautiful traditional dance form of India across the globe.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandeep. Good to talk to you.
Moving on to our next segment, bonus pick. This time I have a book recommendation. Data being the new currency, and with the proliferation of so much data around us, the key decision makers and investors don't want more information. They want a better understanding of the data. As I discovered Signals. Yes, that is the title of the book. The book displays and represents a variety of data points in a very user-friendly manner. It's an amazing way to show and tell the story. The book explains 27 trends defining the future of the global economy. Hope you enjoy the recommendation.